Welcome to Itron Inspire 2025. We are delighted you've chosen to spend these days with us. There's so much we can do. We can network, we can learn together, and perhaps even have a little bit of fun. Lots to cover, so let's get started. Somewhere around 125 years ago and 1,000 kilometers to the northeast, a couple of brothers and their entourage closed up the bicycle shop early and headed out to the strip of beach in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Their desire was to try to get this flying contraption off the ground, and brothers being brothers, they're competitive. They flip a coin to see who gets to go first. Wilbur got the coin toss. He called heads, and he never got the plane off the ground. Orville went next, and he was successful. He flew the plane all of 40 meters. Now, that doesn't sound like a long flight from a modern aviation point of view, but it really is a remarkable feat of engineering. Look at what you had here. You had Charlie Taylor's hand crank and machine engine that is in there. There's no avionics, there's no instrumentation, there's no radar. Okay, you may not need radar if you're flying all of 40 meters, but that was the state of the art 125 years ago. Where we stand today is a little bit different. Today we have commercial airlines that fly 16,000 kilometers, and if you don't believe me, find somebody from Singapore Power in the Knowledge Center later today, and they can tell you it is really 19 hours in a metal tube from Singapore to New York nonstop. But keeping a plane in the air for that long is a very, very different experience than the Wright brothers had all those years ago. But now you have aviation, you have multiple engines, you have radar, you have a lot of different technology. And I tell this story not in any way to disparage the engineering marvel that was that first flight, but to compare and contrast the progress that is being made. And I think this is analogous to what's going on in the grid today. The grid of yesteryear, and in some parts of the world still today, it is an analog device by its very nature. It's perhaps the most complicated machine that humankind has ever developed. But it lacks visibility. It lacks a lot of the things that you need to move into a much more digitized world. And that transition from the Wright brothers plane to the Airbus 350 is what we are in the midst of now. With one small exception, we're rebuilding that engine while the plane is in the air. And that is the challenge that is ahead of us. It would be easy, perhaps, by comparison, if that's all that it was, but grid modernization is happening in the midst of a historic increase in the amount of demand. Demand from an electricity point of view was flat for probably 20 years. What we're staring at now is 25% increase in the next 5 or 6 years and doubling by the time we get to 2050. We're doing this with weather disruptions that are more and more common today. This is not an AI-generated photo on the screen behind me. Find somebody from High West Energy. This is the result of a blizzard that happened somewhere on the border between Nebraska and Wyoming within their territory. But the fact of the matter is floods and fires and hurricanes and heat waves and cold waves are stressing our assets in the field more than ever before. And the costs of these types of events is increasing dramatically. For Western utilities in the United States, the cost of wildfires had increased from perhaps 2% of revenue to closer to 25% of revenue in 2024. That infrastructure itself is changing. It is under an increasing amount of cybersecurity attacks. Cybersecurity attacks are up 70% year over year in 2024. There's nothing the bad guys would like more than to turn off the lights in our cities and really disrupt commerce in the United States. The workforce that operates on all of these things is aging. We need perhaps over 300,000 increased number of employees and replacement employees in the years ahead. In the next 6 years, that is a very, very different workforce than what we have today. Meanwhile, consumer expectations are increasing. Every time you go to the wall and you flip the switch or you turn on the tap, the water must flow and the lights must come on. The tolerance for outages is at a historic low. And there is a massive difference in the amount of benefit that you get as a top tier operator where you have minimal outages and you have consumer trust compared to the bottom quartile. Net promoter scores are 3x higher for that top quartile. And if we want to get to the point that we can use those consumer assets, those batteries behind meters, those rooftop solar assets, even the electric vehicles that are out there, if we want to use those assets as part of the grid in an overall optimization scheme, you need increased trust with those consumers. And the way you get there is digital interaction. The way you gain access to that next generation of employees, those digital natives, is better tools and more visibility into how they will do their job and how the grid will operate. The key to all of this, of course, is data. And if I can get the slide to advance, it will even show that. So real-time data is the vital tool in all of the operations that are ahead of us. With real-time data, we can make decisions faster. We can have an anomaly detection that can separate the wheat from the chaff and know when we have to roll a truck to take care of something on the grid. We can use data and the power of technology to do things like embed a methane sensor into basements next to where there is a meter and understand if there is a low-level leak so that we can proactively shut off the gas, roll a truck, and prevent disaster from happening. We can increase efficiency. We can balance supply and demand out at the edge of the grid, being able to use those consumer assets, being able to use microgrids to provide a better quality of service and really optimize the usage out at the edge. We can predict maintenance issues. We understand when a transformer is starting to go bad so you can proactively change it before there is an outage. And we can get help from the consumers when we equip them with knowledge about how they are using the service. The largest change in consumption really comes from consumers understanding how they are using the service that is provided so that they can take their own decisions, and that insight starts with providing them the data. The usage of those assets, the understanding of consumer behavior, recruiting digital natives really all relies on the use of data. And all of that is possible with Grid Edge Intelligence. Grid Edge Intelligence, what does it mean? Marina really started this off. It is visibility, it is control, it is orchestration, and it is optimization out at the edge of the grid. Visibility, what does that look like? It means being able to protect, really being able to detect an EV charging event out at the edge of the grid. You can see that in the data, so you know you've got an EV at that location. Control, what does that mean? Perhaps we can change the rate of charge on that EV charger to live within that 100 amp panel that's on the side of the house. But you now know that there's a charger there and you can control the rate of charge to live within a specific budget. We can orchestrate things, which means we can understand what is connected to what electrically and start to aggregate all of the endpoints underneath a distribution transformer. And now we can do distribution transformer monitoring without having to add extra grid sensing to the network, only using the endpoint fleet that we have in the marketplace today. And finally, when you get to optimizations, you can set rules to say, hey, I want to be able to do this when that happens. I want to be able to charge this car when the sun is shining on that roof. I don't want you to be able to use my EV to provide energy back to the grid if the charge is less than 40%. You can start to optimize the network and the usage by using all of that real-time data. Visibility, control, orchestration, and optimization. These are the four pillars of what Grid Edge Intelligence really looks like. I've given a bunch of examples there that happen to be electricity-centric, but it doesn't have to stay there. You could use it in a gas environment for increased safety applications, whether we're talking methane detection or overpressure. You can use it in water for leak detection and understanding pressure. Maybe someday we can even use it for water quality. And in the smart city space, you can use it for lighting and increasing public safety. A lot of things you can do once you have those common assets out in the field, with the cornerstone being grid edge intelligence and being able to move at the speed of software with something called distributed intelligence. The ability to download an application into the meter, to look for a certain signal, to take a certain action when certain conditions are presented. That's what DI really means. That's what grid edge intelligence is, and that's what this community is really bringing to life. In the Knowledge Center, when you have an opportunity, you're going to see many of the types of things that I'm talking about and much, much more. We are only just starting to scratch the surface of what this capability really will mean. Let's take a very specific example and something that has a lot of power. This is 2023 data. It was the latest full year data that I could dig up. But the number of total outage minutes in the United States, 60 billion plus. So that's an average of 367 minutes per user over 161 million consumers, and that's up 10% year over year from 22 to 23. If you try to dollarize that, you say, it's about $1.33 in economic value per minute. That's more than $80 billion of cost wrapped up in outages. Outages are real. They are clearly increasing given the pressures of aging infrastructure and cybersecurity attacks and weather events that I talked about earlier. So what could we do using grid edge intelligence to tackle this problem? Let's take a very specific use case and step it through. Given the calendar, figure we'll start with Halloween. And if 87% of you in the audience think that it looks better when that house doesn't have as many decorations, you know the one I'm talking about. It's the one on your street that always over-decorates for every holiday. Maybe this example may not be for you, but if you are in the 13%, that actually might be your house. But in this particular case, let's take an example where a thunderstorm rolls in, high wind, lightning strikes, we do lose some portion of the infrastructure and we have an outage. How could we use grid edge intelligence to try to correct that outage as quickly and as completely as possible? What does outage detection look like today? It is a set of disparate tools. It is like trying to do the puzzle without all of the pieces on the board. These are valuable pieces of information, no doubt about it. We're glad we have them, but still there's some pieces of the puzzle that are missing. And maybe if we could fill in those extra pieces, we could even do a better job with what outage management really will turn out to be. So here's the case. We've got a network on the street. The blue hash lines are the communications, and we see situation normal. Everything is connected, power is flowing, the endpoints are providing the necessary information, everything is doing their job, consumers are happy, no outages. The thunderstorm rolls through, and now we do have an outage. You can see some of those blue lines are missing. So we now have a situation where how can we get the lights turned on as quickly as we possibly can? What sources of data do we have? We can understand perhaps partially what is really happening in the field, but not completely. So the ADMS system clearly tells you something. You know to a certain point visibility in the distribution grid where you have power and where you don't. You did have last gasp messages. A couple of those endpoints on the screen had a red circle that flashed through. So as they were losing power, they gave you information that said, hey, I'm just about to go down. And that is in itself vital information, but it's still an incomplete picture to understand what is happening out at the edge of the grid. So if we do add grid edge intelligence on top of that, we start to add in these red puzzle pieces. We've got some extra information. We've got things like location awareness. Location awareness allows the endpoints to understand who is electrically connected to who, so you can get a good picture of how the system is put together, which endpoint is on which phase, which is connected to which distribution transformer, and which distribution transformer is under which feeder. That's the view that you get. With something like missing endpoints, you can download an agent, an application into the endpoint itself, and you can understand which of your neighbors was present a few minutes ago and which ones are no longer present, giving you some insight as to who's there and who's not there. You can do something like a high-performance ping. You can go and contact each individual endpoint to the tune of 5,000 endpoints per second, over 5 or 6 million endpoints to understand what's there and what's not there, what's communicating. You can marry the data sets between what is on the AMI system and the ADMS system by bringing those things together to get a more complete picture of what is present in the field in front of you today. You can do all of these things when you do start to seed in distributed intelligence endpoints into the field. You don't need to do it everywhere. Of course, it would work better if you did, but at least you're seeding some of these capabilities into the common network. You plug them in, they start to work, and now you have better visibility because you can download applications to look for certain additional signals. So we've now seeded in some of those DI endpoints. We go to work. Before the storm, obviously, those endpoints are communicating both locally among themselves to understand who's connected to whom, and we also have the access in the back office to show what is present. After the storm, you now can start to see what is still connected and which ones are not. You combine that, of course, with GIS data. You roll the truck to the scene of the crime, and you can start to put the system back together again and make the necessary repairs. Once you do that, of course, you think you solved the problem. Perhaps you did. You can see a few more of the lines are coming back on the screen, but you still may not have a complete picture. You may have a nested outage. So before the truck leaves the area, before the crew has to go back and revisit a place they already were, use things like high-performance ping. Use missing neighbors to understand what else might be going on in the area. Once you know that, within a few minutes, you can, again, send the crew to the right spot to be able to make the necessary repair. This is what the power of data really looks like from an outage point of view, and how the tools that are associated with grid edge intelligence can be put to work to solve a common problem like outage after a storm. You do all of that, and now 87%, or at least the full neighborhood, is happy that the kids are out trick-or-treating again, and we have correctly addressed the problem. That's what grid edge intelligence can do in an outage scenario. Of course, I used grid edge and just used outage as the example, but you can use it for consumer side benefits, understand consumers, how they are using the product. You can use it for grid efficiency. You can use it for maintenance. You can use it for safety. It is a generalized toolbox that relies on the power of data and the speed of software to be able to solve a number of different problems. The key in this example was really around resiliency. This was an example of why resiliency tools are so vitally important to what you want to do as you are operating these systems. Developing a full and comprehensive set of tools is really what Itron is endeavoring to do. Last week, we announced a plan to acquire a company called Urbint. Urbint provides a suite of services really targeting resiliency, things like emergency preparation and response. The idea of how do you make sure you've got crews properly positioned before the storm? How do you coordinate the activities when they're in the heat of battle of putting the system back together again? How do you make sure you get them paid? How do you do all the things that go along with emergency response? That's one set of tools. Damage prevention or worker safety, as we recruit all of those hundreds of thousands of new employees into the utility space, a lot of that installed base of knowledge of how things should be done is walking out the door. What can we do to bring the power of data and new tools to the marketplace to enhance worker safety? These are the types of things that Urbint has established in the marketplace, and when we combine it with the nature of the data that comes through a grid edge intelligence application, it's an outstanding set of tools that can be used to enhance resiliency across the industry. This is our vision, and this is where we are leading with that acquisition that should close during Q4. I've given you a lot to think about in a short period of time. The world is changing pretty rapidly. That pace of change is only accelerating, and the future really isn't going to wait for our traditional models to catch up and operate the way we used to. We've got to be able to take control of the situation and cope with the speed of hyperscalers adding more data center, reshoring manufacturing adding more load, regulatory pressure on all of us to how do we make sure we provide resilient and reliable and economically affordable service. We've got to be able to deal with consumer expectations and increasing demands of consumers and partner with them to use those fielded assets as part of the solution and not just one more problem to cope with. This is what grid edge intelligence can do. You can see it in action in the Knowledge Center. There's much more we can do when we do it together. Thank you very much. That's my time.